In Wenfang Village, located in Fuqing City, Fujian Province, China, stands a distinctive four-story red house that stands out among the rural surroundings. This was the home of the Chen family, with 4 children, where the 2 youngest daughters, Chen Baolan and Chen Baozhen, were especially beloved. The sisters were 3 years apart, both known for their gentle personalities and beautiful appearances. Through tireless hard work, Mr. Chen had managed to provide enough financial support to send his 2 daughters to study in Japan after they graduated from high school. Despite being thousands of miles from home, family bonds remained strong through regular video calls, where both sides showed care and shared their daily lives. That fateful day in 2017, Mr. Chen made his usual video call to his 2 daughters. Seeing their bright smiles filled his heart with joy and reassurance. Before ending the call, he promised to send them some hometown specialties they loved. However, this would become the last conversation between father and daughters. Just one night later, both daughters had completely disappeared. The family began to sink into worry and anxiety, as if sensing something terrible had happened. True to their fears, a week later, devastating news from Japan plunged the entire family into an abyss of pain and despair. On the night of July 13, 2017, at 11:40 p.m. on Thursday, thick darkness blanketed a deserted road in Hadano City, Kanagawa Prefecture. A police car moved silently through the desolate mountain forest landscape, where only the buzzing of insects in the night created an eerie silence. 7 days had passed since the Fujian sisters had vanished without a trace on Japanese soil. The vehicle stopped at a point along the road. Police officers stepped out, holding flashlights to illuminate every hidden corner in the dense forest. The weak beams of their flashlights cut through the pitch-black night, searching for clues in the suffocating silence. Suddenly, an urgent call broke the stillness. One officer waved to his colleagues. The entire team quickly gathered around him. Just 16 feet from the roadside, hidden in the bushes, 2 large suitcases appeared with a distinctive foul odor rising from them. With maximum caution, the police approached and opened each suitcase. Inside, they found the bodies of Bao Lan and Bao Zhen, the 2 sisters who had been missing for an entire week. The forensic report confirmed the victims as 25-year-old Bao Lan and her 22-year-old sister Bao Zhen, with an estimated time of death approximately 1 week prior. Both were born in Fuqing City, Fujian Province, and had come to Japan to study after graduating from high school, living in an apartment in Naka Ward, Yokohama City, Kanagawa Prefecture. Their home was 23 miles from where the bodies were discovered, as the crow flies. Bao Lan had studied fashion design at a vocational school in Yokohama. Her educational journey was far from easy. She had to work part-time while studying to cover expenses, sometimes having to temporarily suspend her studies. For this reason, it took her 8 years to complete her program. At the time of the tragedy, Bao Lan had graduated less than 6 months earlier and was working at a restaurant to make a living. Meanwhile, her younger sister Bao Zhen was still a student at a school specializing in game software development, also in Yokohama. She had come to Japan 3 years after her sister, and the 2 were living together in an apartment to save costs and care for each other. Bao Zhen also had a part-time job near their residence. The sisters' lives were closely intertwined, not only in daily activities but also in social relationships. They shared many friends and frequently participated in activities together. The first person to discover the mysterious disappearance of the 2 sisters was Miss A, Bao Lan's closest friend. The friendship between Miss A and Bao Lan had been nurtured over many years. They barely went a day without contacting each other. When Bao Zhen came to Japan through her sister's introduction, she quickly integrated into this relationship. The 3 girls became a close group of friends, regularly meeting to chat and share their lives. On a fateful afternoon, exactly 1 week before the tragedy occurred, Miss A sent a message to Bao Lan as usual. However, until late that night, she had not received any response. This immediately made Miss A feel something was wrong, as Bao Lan was always extremely quick to respond to messages. Even if delayed by just a few minutes, she would proactively send an apology message and explain the reason. Thinking that Bao Lan might be sick or facing some problem, Miss A decided to contact Bao Zhen to inquire about the situation. But strangely, The message sent to Bao Zhen also fell into silence, with no response. At this point, the worry in Miss A's heart had turned into real panic. She began contacting everyone who might know about the two sisters. When she asked colleagues at Bao Zhen's part-time job, she received concerning information. Bao Zhen had been absent that day without prior notice, something that had never happened during her time working there. Bao Zhen was always a very responsible person, and had never missed work without reason like this. With all these unusual signs, Miss A was almost certain that the two sisters had encountered some trouble. Without hesitation, she hurried straight to the apartment where they lived. The sisters' apartment was located in Naka Ward, Yokohama City, specifically in the Hinodeko area. They rented an apartment on the 3rd floor of the building. While this location was convenient for transportation and daily activities, it was close to an entertainment district with many bars and recreational facilities. Especially at night, this area became bustling with all kinds of people passing through, creating an atmosphere that wasn't particularly safe. At exactly 11 p.m., Miss A arrived at the 3rd floor of the apartment building. She continuously knocked on the door and rang the doorbell, but despite waiting for a long time, there was no sound from inside. After waiting in vain, she was forced to leave. However, while descending to the ground floor, Miss A happened to encounter the landlord. With a voice full of worry, she shared her concerns and requested to borrow the key to check the situation inside the apartment. However, the landlord explained that according to strict regulations, they could not freely enter a tenant's room without the presence of building management and police. Miss A urgently emphasized the emergency nature of the situation and suggested at least checking the security camera footage from the building's surveillance system. The landlord seemed quite hesitant about this request. However, Miss A's determined attitude and genuine concern made him begin to feel that something was indeed wrong. After consideration, he decided to have Miss A go home and rest first. Tomorrow morning, he would contact the management and police, and then they could all check the situation together. The next morning, at exactly 9:30 a.m., Miss A's phone rang. It was a call from the landlord. She quickly arrived at the apartment building, where the management and police representatives were already waiting. The group entered the sisters' apartment together. The scene inside was completely contrary to Miss A's worries. The room was neat and tidy, with no signs of struggle or fighting. There were also no traces suggesting anyone had broken in illegally. Except for Miss A, everyone concluded simply that the two sisters had just gone out. But Miss A refused to give up. She insisted on viewing the surveillance camera footage. When the images began to appear on the screen, everyone was amazed by what they witnessed. The surveillance footage showed that on the afternoon of July 5th, the two sisters were recorded entering the apartment building with many bags of various sizes. That evening, following their daily routine, Bao Zhen left the apartment alone to go to her night shift job, while sister Bao Lan remained alone in the apartment. At exactly 1 a.m., a suspicious figure appeared in the camera frame. It was a young man whose face was completely covered by a hat and mask, moving from the 4th floor down to the 3rd floor. Notably, he had a key and opened Bao Lan's apartment door with ease. What happened inside the apartment remained a mystery, but when the young man stepped out of the door, a small object fell to the floor, apparently a piece of rope. Seeing this, he appeared extremely panicked, quickly picked it up and hid it inside his clothes. His confused and worried demeanor was completely obvious. For the next 4 hours, this young man continuously went in and out of the apartment, even going downstairs to buy water before returning. It seemed as if he was waiting for something. At exactly 5 a.m., when Bao Zhen finished her shift and came home, she appeared on camera completely unaware that a stranger was in the house. She used her key to open the door and entered as usual, then closed the door behind her. However, after just a short while, the door suddenly opened a crack and immediately closed again. It's possible that Bao Zhen had discovered something unusual and tried to escape, but clearly she was unsuccessful. From that moment on, just like her sister, Bao Zhen never appeared again. In the following hours, the suspicious young man's behavior became increasingly abnormal. He would occasionally step out of the apartment, his entire body drenched in sweat, as if he had just gone through an intense struggle. His eyes constantly darted around, carefully observing the surroundings to ensure no one was witnessing, then quickly returned inside. At 10 a.m., the young man finally left the apartment building. This time, he no longer concealed his face with a hat or mask, revealing red, swollen eyes that appeared injured. He carried a large bag on his shoulder and walked somewhat hurriedly. At this point, except for the police officers, everyone else was asked to leave the camera viewing room. Miss A decided not to leave the apartment building but waited patiently outside. After a long time, the police finally emerged with extremely serious expressions. They seriously instructed everyone absolutely not to damage the crime scene and immediately notified the police station to officially launch the investigation. From the police account, Miss A learned that the cameras had captured many other important details. Early in the morning of the next day, that is, early morning on July 7th, the young man had returned. This time he wore a white t-shirt and once again skillfully used the key to enter the apartment. After just a few minutes, he appeared again, but this time dragging 2 large suitcases out of the building. His work didn't stop there. The young man continued to go in and out of the apartment many times, each time carrying large bags. Finally, after completing everything, he drove away from the area. Based on the surveillance camera images, police made preliminary speculation about the tragedy's progression. Bao Lan was murdered immediately after the young man first broke into the apartment. When Bao Zhen returned home after her night shift, she also could not escape a similar tragic fate. One day later, the perpetrator returned to the scene to use the suitcases to remove the sisters' bodies from the apartment building. What made everyone shudder was that when the young man returned to clean up the scene, this was less than an hour after Miss A had left the apartment building. This meant that when Miss A stood outside the apartment door knocking and calling the sisters' names, they weren't somewhere else as she thought, but were lying silently inside the apartment, already having lost their lives. If Miss A had decided to stay a little longer or had returned to check, she very likely would have faced the killer directly as he returned to erase traces of his crime. Realizing this, Miss A couldn't help but shudder and took a very long time to regain her composure. In the early stages of the investigation, police naturally directed suspicion toward those who had access to the apartment. The landlord and building management became the first suspects, since besides the tenants, only they possessed apartment keys. However, after conducting thorough investigations, police completely eliminated suspicion of these 2 individuals. Both their physique and appearance didn't match the suspicious young man in the camera, and they also lacked the conditions or motive to commit this crime. Meanwhile, Mr. Chen back in China was also beginning to sense unusual signs. 2 days had passed without him being able to contact his 2 daughters, something that had never happened during their entire time studying abroad. The Chen family had 4 children. The 2 daughters were the youngest in the house and were especially loved by their father. The 27-year-old son always stayed by their parents' side to care for them, while the eldest daughter had married and lived far away. Since graduating from high school and successively going to study in Japan, the 2 youngest daughters had few opportunities to reunite with the family. Because of this geographical distance, their father's affection for them had become even deeper. What gave him peace of mind was that both daughters were very filial and responsible, always maintaining regular contact with the family. The last video call between Mr. Chen and his 2 daughters took place on the evening of July 5th. That fateful night was also when the 2 sisters returned to their apartment after a trip. At that time, they had just returned to their residence in Yokohama, in a cheerful mood after their journey. The conversation proceeded intimately as always, full of laughter and sharing about their lives. However, just one night later, Miss A, the sisters' close friend, had discovered their mysterious disappearance. How could Mr. Chen have suspected that this call would be the last time he would hear his beloved daughters' voices? Meanwhile, Yokohama police had made the preliminary assessment that the Chen sisters had very likely been murdered. Upon receiving this information from Miss A, the family in China was immediately notified. When he received the fateful phone call, Mr. Chen felt as if struck by lightning. He could not accept this cruel reality. The official investigation began rapidly. The first step was for police to compare the physical characteristics and appearance of the suspect with all males renting rooms in the apartment building. The results showed no one matched the description. This proved that the perpetrator was not a resident living in the building. However, the most important detail was that the perpetrator had used a key to enter the apartment easily. This led to the inference that he might be someone the two sisters knew, trusted enough to have a house key. Police began gathering information from colleagues and friends of the two victims. The investigation soon had a breakthrough when a colleague of Bao Lan at the restaurant provided an important clue. He recognized the young man in the camera images. It was a regular customer of the restaurant named Iwasaki Ryuya. The investigation file revealed that suspect Iwasaki Ryuya, 39 years old, was living in the Tasada area of Aoba Ward, Yokohama City. He worked as a dispatch employee, a characteristic form of employment in Japan's current economic context. Unlike regular employees who have direct contracts with companies, dispatch employees sign contracts with third-party personnel companies and are then rented out to various other businesses. However, compared to regular employees, those doing dispatch work typically have lower salaries, fewer promotion opportunities, and lack social security benefits. Information about Iwasaki Ryuya was reported extensively by the media, but this information was contradictory and inconsistent. Some claimed he had been unemployed for a long time, while other sources said he was married with children. There were also reports claiming he had always lived as a bachelor. The disagreement in this information made verifying the truth difficult. However, one thing was clearly confirmed. Iwasaki had known Bao Lan for many years, and there seemed to be a complex relationship between them. According to Bao Lan's colleague, the story began 5 years earlier when she was still a university student and started working part-time at this restaurant. At that exact time, Iwasaki also became a regular customer and began getting acquainted with Bao Lan. From then on, he maintained the habit of coming to the restaurant almost every week, but his purpose was clearly not just to enjoy the food, but also to have opportunities to get close to and chat with Bao Lan. The relationship gradually developed beyond the restaurant space. Iwasaki frequently invited Bao Lan to eat at other restaurants in the area, and sometimes even invited Bao Zhen when her sister came to Japan. Over time, Iwasaki and the Chen sisters became increasingly close. Many people in the area had witnessed all three eating and chatting happily together, creating the impression of a group of friends who had known each other for a long time with a very good relationship. Over 5 years to support Bao Lan, Iwasaki had frequently patronized this restaurant, spending at least several million yen in the shop in total. Some said he had also helped pay part of Sister Bao Zhen's tuition fees. According to Bao Lan's colleague, Iwasaki had Bao Lan's apartment key very early on, and everyone thought the two had been in love for years, even to the point of discussing marriage. 3 days after discovering the Chen sisters' disappearance, police arrested suspect Iwasaki Ryuya. However, he completely refused to cooperate with the investigation. Iwasaki adamantly denied all accusations, insisting he had never set foot in Bao Lan's apartment and was completely unrelated to the sisters' disappearance. The suspect's denials were quickly refuted by objective evidence. Security camera systems near the apartment building had recorded images of Iwasaki's car. The footage showed him loading the suitcases into the car and driving away from the area. Based on this data, police traced his travel route through driving records to search for traces of the two victims. After just 2 days of intensive investigation, the search had a decisive breakthrough. In the outskirts of Hadano City, about 19 miles from Yokohama, in a desolate mountain forest area rarely frequented by people, police forces discovered 2 large suitcases hidden in the bushes not far from the roadside. Inside these suitcases were the bodies of the Chen sisters. Both the surveillance camera system and driving records formed a clear chain of evidence. Iwasaki had taken the suitcases from the apartment building and driven to the area where the bodies were discovered. News of the case quickly spread and immediately attracted strong attention from people in both China and Japan. Media outlets simultaneously reported on the latest developments in the case, while social media exploded with heated discussions about this tragedy. The Japanese online community expressed deep emotion over this tragedy. The majority of Japanese people showed sympathy and heartbreak over the sisters' fate, while expressing a strong desire that the perpetrator would receive severe punishment commensurate with the crime he had committed. As details of the case were gradually revealed, public opinion split into different streams regarding the perpetrator's true motive. Some believed that Iwasaki's primary target was Bao Lan, while sister Bao Zhen was just an unfortunate victim who was implicated by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, another group offered a different analysis based on evidence from surveillance cameras. They pointed out that after Bao Lan had met with misfortune, the perpetrator had no intention of leaving the scene immediately. Instead, he patiently waited in the apartment for hours until Bao Zhen finished her work shift and returned home. This behavior showed that killing both sisters was not an impulsive decision, but had been planned in advance. Regardless of the perpetrator's true motive, for Mr. Chen and his family, they had lost two beloved daughters forever. Despite being immersed in grief, the family still had to gather strength to fight for justice, ensuring that the killer would receive punishment commensurate with the brutal acts he had committed. After 5 days of waiting, visa procedures were finally completed. Mr. Chen, along with family members, immediately took a flight to Japan to handle funeral arrangements for his two daughters. In their hometown of Fuqing, Fujian Province, having children study or work abroad had become a very common phenomenon. Statistics showed that on average, every family in the region had at least one person living and earning a living abroad. Because of this tradition, many local parents had chosen to send their children to study abroad with hopes they would have better lives and broader development opportunities compared to staying in their hometown. Bao Lan and Bao Zhen had attended a boarding school in Fuqing during their high school years. Although their academic results were only average, their ability to take care of themselves and live independently was very good. This had convinced Mr. Chen to make the decision not to have his children take university entrance exams domestically, but instead send them abroad to broaden their horizons and learn. Now, facing this irreversible tragedy, Mr. Chen could not stop crying. In his mind, one thought kept haunting him. If he had not made the decision to send his children to study abroad, would this tragedy have occurred? Feelings of self-blame and regret weighed heavily on his shoulders, while his hatred for the perpetrator also grew to an extreme level. 3 days after the arrest, police conducted a new interrogation with Iwasaki. However, the testimony he gave this time left everyone confused and bewildered. Iwasaki adamantly insisted that he had no intention of harming the two sisters, and that in reality they had voluntarily crawled into the suitcases. To explain this bizarre testimony, Iwasaki offered a complex story. He insisted that he and the Chen sisters were simply friends. According to him, the problem began when Bao Lan graduated 6 months ago, while her student visa was also about to expire. However, Bao Lan could not find another suitable job and was forced to continue working at the restaurant as a server. However, this job did not meet the necessary criteria for applying for a work visa, which meant Bao Lan would not be able to continue staying in Japan legally after her student visa expired. A similar situation was about to happen to sister Bao Zhen, who was also preparing to graduate and facing the same legal status problem. Therefore, to avoid being forced to leave Japan due to visa expiration, the two sisters had thought of an extremely risky plan to fake their disappearance. The idea was that if the plan succeeded, they would be officially registered on the missing persons list. This would cause their identity information to be frozen in the system, so even if their visas expired, they would not be deported immediately. They hoped that after the situation calmed down, they could return to Yokohama, continue their lives, and seek opportunities to stay in the country legally. According to him, the two sisters had built a thorough plan and decided to seek help from a trusted friend, namely him. According to the established agreement, the plan would proceed as follows. The two sisters would take turns crawling into suitcases, then Iwasaki would have the task of transporting these suitcases to a location in the outskirts of Hadano City to create the phenomenon of fake disappearance. Iwasaki insisted that he had carried out exactly as requested, taking the two suitcases to the exact location agreed upon beforehand, then leaving the scene as promised. He continuously emphasized that his role was simply to support the sisters in implementing their pre-planned scheme. Most importantly, Iwasaki adamantly maintained that at the time the two people crawled into the suitcases, they were still alive, and he had never taken any action that harmed them. However, this testimony immediately revealed many serious logical flaws that anyone could recognize. Even if the two sisters truly intended to fake their disappearance to solve their visa problem, they could have chosen much safer methods instead of the extremely dangerous option of crawling into suitcases. The most obvious unreasonable point was that suitcases cannot be opened from the inside, which meant that once they crawled in, they would be completely trapped. Especially in the hot summer weather conditions, inside the suitcases would become a sealed environment, lacking oxygen and air circulation. Under such circumstances, even a healthy person could face life-threatening danger in a short time. Most importantly, Iwasaki claimed they were still alive when they entered the boxes, but this didn't match the forensic report. The forensic report showed that both sisters had obvious fatal injuries, clearly indicating they were placed in the suitcases after losing their lives. The crime scene camera also provided crucial evidence. After Iwasaki Ryuya took away the suitcases, no one else came to the scene. All evidence proved that he was the perpetrator who killed the Chen sisters. A month after the murders occurred, the sisters' funeral was held in Yokohama. News of the funeral spread among the international student community, and quite a few people came to the apartment building where the two had lived to place memorial flowers for them. While Iwasaki offered testimony full of holes, police investigation was gradually revealing other important evidence. An acquaintance provided detailed information about the complex relationship between Bao Lan and Iwasaki, along with a meaningful photograph. The photo was taken at Bao Lan's workplace, showing Iwasaki wearing a green dress, standing next to Bao Lan with a bright smile. This image suggested that Iwasaki might have quite special personal preferences that perhaps not many people knew about. The important breakthrough came from police analysis of Iwasaki's phone data. Results showed that he had repeatedly searched for keywords related to handling consequences after committing crimes and methods for evading pursuit by authorities. This search data formed irrefutable evidence proving that Iwasaki had planned the murders in advance. The investigation was expanded with police interviewing relatives, friends, and colleagues of the Chen sisters. They also pursued email and message records, step by step piecing together fragments to reconstruct the entire story. Through this process, police gradually formed a clearer picture of the true motive behind Iwasaki's crime. One notable point was that regarding the visa issue, Iwasaki's account was not completely false. In reality, Bao Lan's student visa was indeed about to expire at that time. For foreigners wanting to stay in Japan long-term, besides applying for work visas, marrying a Japanese citizen was considered one of the fastest and most legal paths. Based on information gathered, police speculated that to solve her legal problems, Bao Lan might have proposed some kind of marriage arrangement to Iwasaki. Considering the 14-year age gap between them, this might not have been a relationship intended for long-term cohabitation. There was a hypothesis that for whatever reason, Bao Lan's decision had completely angered Iwasaki. He felt he had given so much to her, only to end up being just a tool. In his rage, he decided to make both Chen sisters pay with their lives. One day before the murders occurred, there had been an incident that escalated the conflict between Iwasaki and Bao Lan dramatically. That day, Bao Lan and Bao Zhen had gone on a trip with another friend, hiding this from him. When Iwasaki learned about this, he lost emotional control, feeling completely deceived. It's speculated that this incident may have given rise to his murderous intentions. After ending their trip, the two sisters returned to their Yokohama apartment and video-called their father. After finishing, Bao Lan stayed home to rest while Bao Zhen went out for her night shift. That night, Iwasaki, carrying a pre-prepared key and rope, snuck into the apartment. After an argument with Bao Lan, he killed her. Then he waited in the house for Bao Zhen to return. Early in the morning when Bao Zhen came home, she was also murdered. Since it was already light, Iwasaki temporarily didn't move the bodies, simply cleaned the scene and left. Early the next morning, he snuck back into the apartment, put both people in suitcases, and dumped the bodies in the suburbs. This time, because he didn't cover his face, his movements were recorded by cameras, and his identity was exposed. 3 days after the funeral, He was transferred to the prosecutor's office, officially entering judicial proceedings. 1 year after the murders occurred, this case opened its first trial at the Yokohama District Court. Defendant Iwasaki Ryuya was charged with murder, body disposal, and other crimes. At the court, police believed the defendant had planned to kill the Chen sisters, and after committing the crime had also tried to cover up his crimes, showing no remorse whatsoever. This case had brutal circumstances, not only causing the deaths of 2 young lives, but also severely impacting society, and requested the court to sentence him to death. The defense side persisted with their previous stance, advocating the defendant's innocence. The defense said that defendant Iwasaki Ryuya's association with Bao Lan was factual, that no motive for murder existed, and emphasized again that he had only been entrusted to assist with the disappearance, completely denying the accusations. After 2 weeks of trial, the Yokohama District Court rendered its verdict. Defendant Iwasaki Ryuya was found guilty of murder and other charges and sentenced to 23 years in prison. The prosecution believed the sentence was too light and didn't accept the verdict, so they appealed. This verdict quickly sparked controversy online. Many netizens expressed dissatisfaction with the sentence, believing that sympathy and empathy for the victims were completely not reflected in the verdict. Some comments said that Iwasaki's actions had brought extremely negative impacts to society, but requiring only 20+ years of imprisonment was unacceptable. From a legal perspective, the case handling was not yet finished. 1 year after the first trial ended, the Tokyo High Court issued an important ruling, sending Iwasaki Ryuya's case back to the district court for retrial. Notably, according to Japanese judicial procedures, if the High Court, when hearing an appeal case, discovers major defects in the first trial, for example, inappropriate evidence assessment or incorrect sentencing basis, and these problems cannot be directly corrected in the second trial, the case will be sent back to the first trial court for retrial. The main issue lay in the reasonableness of the sentence. The Yokohama District Court believed that the perpetrator had not used weapons like sharp knives, and in similar previous case verdicts, sentences for this type of behavior were usually lighter. The High Court pointed out that although Iwasaki Ryuya didn't use sharp knives, the methods he employed were equally deadly dangerous for 2 female victims with weak physiques. Therefore, the High Court believed that when the District Court determined the sentence, they had set wrong judgment criteria, leading to a sentence that was too light and unreasonable. So they decided to send it back for retrial. The victim's family expressed support for the retrial. By this time, 2 years had passed since the Chen sisters were murdered. Regarding the verdict exempting the perpetrator from the death penalty, the victim's family felt especially angry. In China, intentional murder with serious circumstances could very likely result in a death sentence, but in Japan, applying the death penalty is extremely cautious, requiring strict and lengthy judicial procedures. 2 years later, in July 2021, the case retrial opened at the Yokohama District Court. Iwasaki still adamantly maintained his innocence, refusing to answer any questions suggesting his guilt. The prosecution also abandoned their previous request for the death penalty, requesting a life sentence instead. The retrial lasted 2 months, and the Yokohama District Court sentenced Iwasaki Ryuya to life imprisonment. The verdict pointed out that after full deliberation, the court believed life imprisonment was the appropriate punishment for the crimes the defendant had committed. After that, Iwasaki continued to appeal, but the appeal was quickly rejected, maintaining the life sentence verdict. And that's it for today's case. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next videos.